Our journey, or at least part of it, begins on the tranquil shores of the Mississippi. This is Fort Snelling State Park, what used to be Dakota land, and what they believe was a place of creation. This same land would be the origin of many African American roots in Minnesota. In 1863, the Davenport and Northerner brought more than 500 newly freed enslaved men, women, and children from the South. The boats docked right here. Their ropes were tied around these very trees, leaving century-old scars in the wood. In the oral tradition of the Dakota people, it is said that the boat that brought Dred Scott to Minnesota anchored to one of these trees. Our history is rarely told, but we've been here all along. So where did we go from here?
Originally, we started off on 2023 Bloomington, then we moved across the street from this fire station on 36th Avenue. My grandparents bought their property from one of the firemen here. Our grandparents had the two lots that were on Hiawatha, and our lot was directly behind theirs, and my cousin's, my uncle's lot was next to us.
No, it was the most amazing childhood. Our grandparents were there, and my father's only sibling, their family lived right next door, so we always had each other. We used to ride our bikes all over. We had relatives that lived another couple of miles further from the golf course, but we used to fish at the golf course. We would always swim. We'd ride our bikes there. And
in the springtime, when the golf course would flood, there'd be ponds with carp in them, and we hit a spear in the water, and sometimes we'd cut practice and spearfish instead.
Felt to be one of the only black policemen?
he didn't talk about it a lot. I know that he was very, very well respected.
My dad was in the 784th Tank Battalion. Mom was in the 6888 Male Detachment, and she was assigned in England. That was a male battalion. They were supposed to fail. They apparently had about a 2-year backlog of mail that these ladies in 6 months had cleared up, had come up with a method of identifying different soldiers with the same name and getting the mail to the right people.
Minneapolis?
Grew up in South Minneapolis, yeah.
What part?
Right on 44th and Oakland. So 44th and Oakland, 44th and 3rd, and now I live on 44th and Park. Everybody in the neighborhood was like a family. Like, they say it takes a village to raise I mean, everybody knew each other. The kids, we were always outside playing. If one of us messed up, one of the parents, everybody knew us. So, yeah, that's what I miss about it. Oh, yeah. I go off that Hiawatha a lot.
When I was probably 12 or 13, I used to go up there to caddy. Yeah. Which was, the highlight of my weekend, because that was fun, and that doesn't even happen anymore.
I saw my Aunt Jane, Aunt Jane was, I guess, probably one of the best golfers that everybody talked about.
Yeah.
But her being a woman and of color, they wouldn't let her play.
That golf course is Black history in Minnesota, and it needs to stay. He would be either my third or fourth grade uncle. I do have a packet of history.
Yeah.
We had our family reunion, and John Cheatham is buried at the cemetery on Cedar.
You know, everybody claims that they're the first
Yeah.
Black family in Minnesota, you know, but we do got some history. We've been around for a while.
We all stayed together and lived in South Minneapolis as far back as I can remember. My family, we basically just worked ourselves down 4th Avenue from East 25th Street to the home that I live in right now is on 4th Avenue in South Minneapolis. Went to Bryan Junior High School, so I think very affectionately about 38th Street and 4th Avenue. The church that I still attend and my family attend is on 41st and 4th Avenue. My family, my dad and mom moved us out to 42nd in Oakland, which is a few blocks off of 4th Avenue. The grade school I went to was Field, which is on 46th and 4th. So yeah, I remember all the addresses, and they were all in the vicinity of 4th Avenue through South Minneapolis. Donald W. McMoore, but he was best known as Bill McMoore. He was a graduate of South High School, went to the University of Minnesota. You see, did his graduate work, and he was one of the early teachers in the Minneapolis public schools, because it wasn't until my memory serves me correct, it wasn't until the mid-50s, the late 50s, where the Minneapolis public schools hired African American people to teach in the school system. And of course, you know, he talked about what it was like to climb the ladder in the Minneapolis public schools, but there certainly were issues. Yeah. You know, he believed he was looked over at certain times because of race, class, and culture. He truly loved working with young folks and working in the Minneapolis public schools. That was very important to him. Way back when, and I've been able to go back to the early 1800s when my family migrated from the South because we worked the plantations in like South Carolina up to Virginia, and came into Hastings, Minnesota, is where my grandmother was raised, and her family's name was the Wallace family. And there's several Wallace family members that, you know, resided in South Minneapolis and are still close to, South Minneapolis. And along Franklin Avenue South, there's there's more than several old South Minneapolis families that lived in that area and went to South High School, okay? And so when that neighborhood started to fall apart, it curved around, 35W picked it up, and then it worked its way down. Down actually alongside 4th Avenue, over where 35W is now. So again, if you look at maps, you can see how the freeway kind of pushed our neighborhood further to the south side.
In 62, 63 is when they built 35W. That destroyed the black businesses on 38th Street. And so the few that we had, there used to be a lot more. And once they took out the houses, which meant the streets, businesses died. So, and those were predominantly black. So
The gas station was black owned. The grocery store, one of the grocery stores was black owned. Little corner market was black owned. My principal was black. The liquor store was black owned. There was a Mexican restaurant owned by some Latinos. And it was just, predominantly, a black neighborhood.
Our Black Wall Street was taken away, or it worked its way. Dreamland's not there, Nakarima's not there. Tilson built homes, in the racial covenant out along 4th Avenue in South Minneapolis. And now the final jewel is Hiawatha Golf Course. And what's left?
Gentrification, you hear about that, but it happened to me. So people say, oh, no, that doesn't happen. But I had it happen when I had moved out of the neighborhood for a little while. And a buddy of mine lived on 44th and Park. And he was moving out of state. So he's like, you want to buy my house? And I'm like, yeah, of course. I want to get back into the neighborhood. So I buy the house, nothing, years go by. And then he tells me, I was talking about one of my neighbors and he didn't like my neighbor. And I don't know why, but I was like, well, what's going on? He's like, well, when I went to sell you the house, the guy came over, knocked on my door and was like, hey, don't sell the house to Ludi. It's not good for the neighborhood. We don't think he's good for the neighborhood. This is in 10 years ago. So 2010, he goes, oh, we don't think he's good for the neighborhood. And the guy I bought the house from was like, what do you mean? He's been here since, before 67, 63? So, we've been in the neighborhood forever, 55, 60 years.
I was born in 1961. And at that time, my parents bought a house on 44th and 3rd. Could not buy a house past 46th. That was kind of the dividing line. I mean, this is 2022. We're still dealing with things. Racism. I've dealt with more racism lately than I even really care to talk about.
And I remember there came a time in grade school when, as the only black classmate, you stopped getting invited to birthday parties. I remember it seemed like a lot of places that we went, there was just us. But I don't think that ever held us back. We were expected to be good citizens, and we were Christians, and you treated people like you wanted to be treated, even if they didn't treat you that way. But we had family. We had that support.
Because in South Minneapolis, as people, we were about something. And we had to stand for something, and we had values we were supposed to live by, and a lesson that was unacceptable. But if you chose to be a garbage collector be the best garbage collector. You know, if you chose to do this, be the best at that, you know. So, and the kind of relationships we formed, I think that was real important, because we all knew each other in the South Side, and it was important to uphold that and, you know, keep those relationships and have those relationships mature and use what our families always taught us.
Just think about all the gains that strives and that Black people have made through this in this city. Has never been recorded. You know, our history has never been recorded. You know, we recorded ourselves, you know.
If you don't know where you came from, you don't know where you're going to go. And I think that's what's sad about many of the folks in our neighborhoods now. They don't know where they came from. And it's clouding their picture about the future and where they're going to go and how they're going to get there. And that's painful to see happening. And you know, I'm very grateful, because who I refer to as the next generation, you know, my daughter and her husband and her cousins and all them, we, you know, stayed in South Minneapolis, where many of them still are. So that's our home.
Now we're the old people, the aunts, uncles, grandmas, and grandpas, because everybody else is gone. That's why history is so important. That's why family reunions are so important. You know, you have to be able to pass these stories on, so that when people like you come to talk about it, we can give you answers from what we remember, from what the stories that were told. So.